I think it's fair to say that Anthony Joshua is the main event fighter of all main event fighters, and tonight in Riyadh, he just proved it. Tonight, you had an all star card with guys that are big boxing names, such as Bivol, Deontay Wilder, Joseph Parker, and then you had who else you had in that card? You had a whole bunch of names. Akhmedov, which was an upset by Agit. And then you had other fights such as Lyndon Arthur, who, by the way, made a great account of himself, but has a big name in the UK circuit. Nonetheless, a great fight and a great night of fights, and Anthony Joshua was on top of that whole entire card, and rightfully so. You got to understand, this guy's career trajectory has been main event fight after main event fight after title fight, unification after unification, title defenses after title challenges after title challenges, so on and so forth. Anthony Joshua earned the right to be able to call himself the main event fighter of all main event fighters. Now, more importantly, one thing that I want to bring out about Anthony Joshua is his massive improvement skills that he has developed along the way. Over time, a lot of people look at losses as some sort of downfall in an athlete, and in particular in a boxer, especially in a sport that constantly emphasizes on being undefeated, even if you have to go beat a bunch of cans to do it. This is the constant type of culture that they push in the boxing world. Well, now the Saudis came into play. They decided, you know what, we're going to have the best, fight the best, and no BS about it. And because of that, we're going to have the guys find out who the best heavyweights are. And if they lose somewhere along the lines, they still have a chance to redeem themselves. Even with Deontay Wilder losing to Joseph Parker tonight, which was one of the biggest upsets of the entire card, it still shows that Deontay Wilder can come back. He did make a great account of himself, but that goes without saying. Every time you can reach the distance, you can always give a good account of yourself and not have to fall into the excuses of, let's say, getting finished. Colby Covington did the same thing. You look at him, he got into a situation where he got finished. Well, he didn't get finished this time with Leon Edwards, but he did get finished with Kamaru Usman, and he created the biggest excuse ever. Well, if you don't get finished, you can create an even bigger excuse. Now, what is Deontay Wilder's excuse? Maybe because of the fact that he was taking ayahuasca, that he's a little bit less prideful, that perhaps maybe that affected his killer instinct a little bit. Who knows? The bottom line is, Anthony Joshua tonight showed that he is the main event fighter of all main event fighters, because at one point, Deontay Wilder was the undefeated guy. He was the guy who was rising to the top while Anthony Joshua lost his belts to Andy Ruiz. And now, with the Saudis being part of this whole ordeal, guess what they did? Now, they've given opportunities to these guys where it's now become the reverse effect. It is now Anthony Joshua on a winning level, whereas Deontay Wilder is on, let's say, a losing streak of some sort, to where, well, Anthony Joshua looked like he was improving a lot in his performance, and it looked like Deontay Wilder just looked a whole lot older and slower as the rounds went on. Now, in the earlier part of the fight, he did a very good job in being able to use his footwork and move around, but then eventually it just came about the way that it did. And unfortunately, it was a loss for Deontay Wilder, but have no fear, because you know what? This is the era of losses in boxing don't really mean anything. Floyd Mayweather, Joe Calzaghe, even Khabib in the world of mixed martial arts sort of created this world where, you know what, we all have to be undefeated, and if you're not worth anything. And that's just not how it goes, right? You fight top competition every week in the NFL, in the Premier League, and all these real sports. Well, guess what? If boxing, MMA, and combat sports is going to be a real sport, guess what? You have to put these guys in real fights. And you also can't downplay them if, let's say, they don't become successful in attempting to be great. And here comes Anthony Joshua coming off 2 losses from Alexander Usyk after having a heavy schedule that he did. Okay, and now finally bouncing back. Speaking of heavy schedules, how about Israel Adesanya? a possible matchup that could happen in UFC 300. Against who? We don't know. Here's a couple of matchups that I had mentioned in the UFC card of 300 that I thought was going to happen, but is not happening. GSP versus Nick Diaz. Definitely not happening. George St. Pierre shot that down, and he's had recent interviews where he was a guest in some fighting events, whether it was in karate, combat, or in the UFC, and blatantly shut that notion down. Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate, we don't know. We know Miesha Tate is currently active. Ronda Rousey is still in the UFC. I'm sorry, still in the WWE, which, by the way, makes it a very easy transition because guess what? They're all owned by the same company. And then the Saudis obviously involved in the WWE as well. That should be an interesting mix, along with these sports conglomerates that are now collaborating with each other among these other promotions, such as Matchroom and Queensberry and Salita's Boxing and all these other guys that are with, let's say, Finkel and Joseph Parker and all these other big names that you never thought would collaborate, or at least not within the bigger space of names and whatnot. These promoters have always collaborated, just not wanting to risk their fighters' reputation in a blatant and bold way that they would now because of the fact that the Saudis are willing to basically buy off your undefeated record or buy off your rankings in the particular system that you're at. Now, how about the Jai fight against Elizoro? By the way, if you guys didn't know, he was stripped of this fight because he took this fight that the Saudis wanted to give him, which, by the way, is quite interesting because, once again, with boxing, there's a difference between the promotions sanctioning titles as opposed to an independent sanctioning title such as the WBA, WBC, IBF, IBO, and things of that nature. So that is the reality of these fights that are going on right now with UFC 300. Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate yet to be announced, maybe not even announced at all. Nick Diaz and George St. Pierre, not a fight to happen at all. And there is one fight that is happening that is for sure that I can report about, which is for the BMF belt with Justin Gaethje taking on Max Holloway. Now, this is a great addition to the whole entire card because guess what? Now there's one title that's at stake among the other title fights that they may try to put onto this card. And with that, I think just adds on to the mystique of Max Holloway moving up to 155. If you didn't know, he moved up to 155 to take on Dustin Poirier, and it didn't go well for him. Dustin Poirier won the interim championship and eventually went on to fight Khabib to unify that as a result of it. And here we are. Now Max Holloway has had a few chances against Volkanovski. Didn't work out, but here he is now back in the mix of possibly having a super fight like this against Justin Gaethje. I think that fight is signed. So for sure, we're going to see that fight. I think it's going to be a great stand-up fest, and rightfully so. The criteria that they have for the BMF belt, which is weird because they sort of create these criteria on their own, whether they have a journeyman journey or these guys that would take short notice fights or guys that have knockout power or guys that somehow have striking propensity in the way that they fight. But either way, it's a great addition for the card. And once again, this whole entire card in boxing was a great addition with Anthony Joshua on the top as what? The main event fighters of all main event fighters. Because why? Just like Anthony Joshua and just like Israel Adesanya, his fellow Nigerian brother, they stay busy and they deserve to have the names that they have and have a chance to get a crack at the world title when he comes back against, that would either be Dricuss du Plessis or Sean Strickland, two storylines that are waiting for Israel Adesanya, which brings me to the prediction that I'm going to make with Sean Strickland versus Dricuss du Plessis. Now, once again, I want you to understand, full disclosure, this is only an early prediction. My early prediction is that I'm going to go with Dricuss du Plessis. Why? Because of the way that they run their camp. I remember watching some content with MMA Guru because, as you guys know, he flew down there to South Africa to train with Dricuss du Plessis and Simon and all those guys that are in his camp. And he said something that I thought was really important to understand about fight camps in general, which is that if you are a superstar fighter oftentimes you are the guy that ends up running the whole entire gym, because guess what? Who can tell you no? You are the guy that wins championship belts. You are the guy that's bringing in all the big cash to the gym. Who's going to tell you no? However, there are gyms out there that operate like a military system where there is a ranking. Even though you are the star fighter, guess what? You are only the star infantry tier 1 operator that is going out there getting the glory and the battle all in one. But in reality, you have a commanding chain of officers and generals that hand you down orders in order to mitigate chaos that you are dealing with out in that cage. And the way that Dricuss and Simon run their camp, it's a military. Their coach is their general, and there is no argument in that. Same thing with City Kickboxing. Eugene Berman is the general, even though he has a camp full of stars, such as Dan Hooker, Carlos Ulberg, Kai Kara France, Israel Adesanya, Volkanovski, Dan Hooker, all these big names, Blood Diamond. The list can go on and on with City's Kickboxing's roster. But either way, he is the general of that whole entire military, and he runs it. And this is the way that you have to run camps, because otherwise you're going to have chaos involved, and then you're not going to be able to know how to mitigate that chaos when you're in that cage. By the way, not that I'm the biggest fan of Sigmund and Freud in any kind of way or whatever, but he said how a person's house looks like is a reflection of their mind in terms of chaoticness or calmness or focus. In other words, if you have a messy or dirty house, it shows that maybe you're not a focused person. And again, this is Sigmund and Freud. Take it with a grain of salt. It is a great saying. There are great examples of that. The military does emphasize that in a way where they constantly make you go out and clean, constantly make you go out and shine your boots, constantly make sure that your uniform is intact and things of that nature. Why? Because it translates over to how you're going to mitigate danger in a chaotic world of combat. And combat sports included is no different than that. So right now, the real technical breakdown that I have of Dricuss du Plessis is, number one, his camp. Number two, I think that there is just certain situations where a guy is way more athletic than the other guy, and no matter what skills the other guy brings, and by the way, Sean Strickland has really great skills involved in his prowess, in his repertoire, but I think somewhere down the line, he can't make a mistake with someone like Dricuss. Dricuss is allowed to make a mistake because he's so athletic that it allows him to be able to go out there and, let's say, push the pace in a way where his body is able to handle it. Because guess what? Where he trains at in South Africa is high elevation. Something to really understand. Sean Strickland has great cardio, but Sean Strickland is susceptible to making mistakes. And you look at the Alex Pereira fight to really understand that and understand how much of a freak athlete Dricuss du Plessis is. He's not even the most technical guy, which makes him even more dangerous. Now, you can change that in between camps. If, let's say, Dricuss decides to sharpen up his technical proficiency, it could be very dangerous for Sean Strickland, especially when he's coming in emotional because of the little brawl and the little melee and the little banter they had going on in that week of UFC 296. Now possibly taking that into the next month of January 20th, possibly getting emotional. Maybe the emotions is good for the training camp of Sean Strickland, but in reality, perhaps it's not going to do him any good when he goes into that fight with Dricuss du Plessis, a guy who is super athletic, not the most technical guy in the world, but has the power, stamina, and speed, and everything else in between to basically come out on top with any mistakes that he has. Just like Deontay Wilder tonight. Deontay Wilder has that one-shot knockout that can erase all the problems that he has. So this is why I'm going with Dricuss du Plessis by a possible finish somewhere in the later rounds of the championships. And my prediction may change somewhere down the road as the fight draws near. But for right now, I think that the military-style camp that Dricuss du Plessis has, along with his athletic ability, the fact that he's able to get away with things that most people can't, and look at the Robert Whittaker fight as a great example of that. Now we're going to see that with Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland is great. Don't get me wrong, Sean Strickland has a great camp. He's got a great team behind him, but he makes a lot of mistakes And I think this is where Dricuss du Plessis is going to shine the most. That is my 15 minutes of combat sports news, breakdowns, and possible matchups that are going to happen in UFC 300. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the live that I did for the Anthony Joshua Day of Reckoning versus Otto Wallin and all that all-star boxing card, along with the video that I made prior to that, why these matchups in this particular card is important for the future of boxing and the events that they can make out of it. Because even though that was a preview for that fight, a lot of that video, a lot of the content in that video is still relevant to the space that we're going to see in the future matchups in boxing. I urge you guys to take a look at that. Once again, the Day of Reckoning live fight reaction, which is on the live section. Also look for why these matchups are important for the future of boxing on the video section. And also like and subscribe to this one. Share. Don't forget to tell a friend so we can spread this and make the channel grow. Inshallah.